its principal sort of raison d'etre is to reduce society back to a blank state. What it says is that by introducing terror on a widespread basis into society, it basically reverts to a tabula rasa, or a blank state, where exterior control can be put onto the population.
Just look at this interview screened on Sky News with some of the alleged rioters after the events. "Okay lads, I want you all to stand over there on that wasteland and wear these on your faces. Do they think we were born yesterday?" Compare these mild disturbances with the poll tax riots or the miners' strike. They are like chalk and cheese. Now, if the intelligence agencies wanted to deliberately start this situation, it would not require a huge team or operation to do so. Control of the media is an important requirement, which MI5 operate like a puppet master controlling Pinocchio's strings. The other requirement to instigate these disturbances would be an event to start the ball rolling. We come to the cold-blooded murder of 29-year-old Mark Duggan, who was shot by a police officer for no reason whatsoever.
Something that was released anonymously. It was found in a photocopier.
Right.
And it was discovered by somebody who then published it in a book. Right. No one knows who the author is.
But it's done on behalf of a government then?
Yeah, it's basically it's a do-it-yourself guide to the New World Order. It reads as a sort of guidebook which the manipulators need to follow in order to control people.
Obsessed with unimportant things, and what Brzezinski describes this is amusement focus, like huge events like X Factor, like sporting events where you've got the entire populace basically splitting them down into teams, so they're arguing about each other and they're all focusing on something that's basically not important. That's one of the mainstays of the report from Iron Mountain, is to get the populace interested in things that are unimportant.
Well, keep the masses distracted by matters of no real importance, and discourage investigations into what really interests them.
Right.
Right. And that describes our media perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah. Now, there are a number of methods that our media currently uses to trick people and to make it's perception management, essentially, make you think what they want them to think. One of the things that they use, I call it a phony bone of contention. So what this is they have a story that they create contention over. So there's an argument over something. And in the subtext of that story is a flawed assumption, which you automatically accept.
It says, keep all mainstream media at a 6th grade level. Discourage technical creativity and give them junk food for thought. That was a quote. Junk food for thought is the phrase they use.
Right. This story here, betrayal of a 7/7 bomb victim. Born to British parents, married to a British housewife. This was in the Daily Mail the other day. A symbol of British courage, so why is he now facing deportation? So inside the paper there's a picture of this guy who was a victim of the London bombings with a bandage on his head and he's got blood on his face. And for some reason, I don't know what the reason is, they're deporting him for something. So it's trying to get you emotionally involved in this argument to say, isn't that terrible? He was a victim of 7/7 and we're deporting him, it's terrible. But what is the subtext of that story? The subtext of that story is 7/7 bombings were carried out by terrorists. So you accept that automatically if you get involved in that argument. So they do this very cleverly. They create they've probably just searched for that story, or find someone who's having a hard time who was involved in 7/7 and put it on the front page. And then we can subconsciously remind people that 7/7 was a real event and it was carried out by terrorists, without having to mention that specifically.
In actual fact, if you look at the media outlets, there's probably about 4 or 5 different corporations that own the majority, 95% of the media, and they've got an agenda. They've got an agenda and they've got people working for them that want to keep people occupied.
There was a great one the other day. Anyone see the story about the Queen supposedly talking about Abu Hamza? So the argument with that was, ooh, should the Queen be talking about Abu Hamza? Or should the person have written the story or eavesdropped on her? When you're getting involved in that argument, what are you doing? You're accepting the fact that Abu Hamza is a dangerous terrorist. Now, Abu Hamza was very good pals with Rashid Aswat. You don't know who he was? He's an MI6 agent. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if Abu Hamza is as well, or some kind of controlled entity. Yeah, they try to big up people and make them think that
they can see through everything,
Yeah.
and that's one way of actually making sure that they don't see through everything.
Yeah, yeah, it makes people feel secure, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a criticism that's levelled against conspiracy theorists all the time. Oh no, you're just setting yourself up so that you're superior to people. You know what is up, what is down, what is left, what is right, and you're other from everybody else. That criticism uses exactly the same psychological process by criticising and saying there's no way that that could be real because I know that this is up, this is down, this is left, this is right, and I'm far, far too informed to be tricked.
There was another one in the story in the press the other day. It was suicide bombers. Now I'm very, very sceptical. Whenever they say there's a suicide bomber, I say, well, show me his leg and I'll believe it's a suicide bomber, or show me his mother crying her eyes out. They never do. Okay. And they were arguing over, someone said, oh, there was a teenager, it's terrible that they're so young, and then someone else says, no, he was 28 or something. So they're having an argument over how old the suicide bomber was. So what does your brain do when they're having that argument? It immediately goes, well, of course there's a suicide bomber. It's the phony bone of contention, and they do this all the time in the news.
It's another example of what Ian R. Crane calls myths without the negative connotation of the word myth. In other words, people believe something and they think it's true, but they don't objectively know it's true.
Yes.
I despise the mainstream media. I think it's one of the most terrible weapons ever perpetrated on the human race.
Yeah.
And this headline here, I actually think, I could be wrong here, but I think there's a possible subliminal in that headline. I'm just going to show you it. Bomb victim Kate. There's been several of these, a lot of them about Harry. You know, so this story on the right with Kate is completely unrelated to the 7/7 story, but they align the text with the person. So your eye, that goes into your subconscious. I don't know why they would want to put that there. I think they're possibly planning some false flag thing involving the royals so that William can then be catapulted. No, I'm not saying they're going to kill anyone, but it's some fake event which will catapult William to the position of king.
For instance, you look at the subtlety and the ingeniousness of modern propaganda compared to, for instance, the posters for the First World War, you know, where Lord Kitchener points at the camera and goes, your country needs you.
Yeah.
You know those posters?
Yeah.
It was all very simplistic, very childish. No one will fall for that now.
No.
So in a sense, the manipulators have to jump through more hoops than they used to because people are getting harder and harder to control.
Yeah.
I gave a presentation in Hebden Bridge, Yorkshire, just a few weeks after the events of 7/7. And it was one of the very first public presentations I gave looking at the deconstructing the events of 7/7 and demonstrating that the evidence that was in the public domain did not match the official narrative. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the evening, this gentleman came up to me, and I still have his business card, and he introduced himself, and he said that he agreed with everything I'd said, and in fact he shared with me some other information. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the business card, and it was a senior journalist with the Yorkshire Evening Post. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, this is great. I said, so when does your article appear? And he hung his head, shook his head, and he said, Ian, I wrote the article. He said, I submitted it to my editor, and my editor called me in and said, you know very well this can't go into print. If it goes into print, it'll be journalistic suicide.
When one of the completely innocent supposed suicide bombers lost his life, what they did, he worked in a bookshop called the ICRA Learning Centre. This was in Beeston, where he lived. I think it was in 2001. They sent some police officers and the media to that bookshop where he had worked, and it was selling things like John Pilger DVDs and 9/11 truth videos. And what they did, the police got there and they said, right, we're going to break your door down, we're going to raid it. And the guy who was standing there with his key said, no, I'll open the shutters for you, you can have a look around, we've got some John Pilger DVDs, what have you. The police said, no, we're going to break the door down. And the media cameraman was standing there, break the door down with the guy standing there with his key, and the following day, in the newspaper, Islamic fundamentalist bookshop raided by the police, who this supposed bomber worked at. That's called a psychological operation, and our newspapers are full of those bogus stories.
I think Blair knew a lot. I mean, David Shayler claims he was an MI5 agent well before he became Prime Minister, or well before he became Labour leader. So I think Blair knows all about the terrorist plots being done by MI5, in my opinion. I can just tell by his body language when he's given his reaction, he knows about it. Whereas I think David Cameron, does he know the full? I don't know.
I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he said that none of your thoughts are your own. Your minds are moulded and your tastes are suggested. All your ideas are formed by people that you've never met, that have agendas that you've got no idea about. him and intellectuals like Walter Lippmann basically felt that, you know, for the sake of this progressive democracy, people are irrational and stupid, and they need to be contained using fear so that basically the society can continue.
The US Department of Defense had approached Steven Spielberg and asked him to produce a movie with the name of Deep Impact, about a meteor hitting the Earth.
Yeah.
And this was about, I mean, I remember hearing this, and this was about 3 years before the movie came out.
Yeah. Colonel John Alexander, who was involved, I believe I heard him on a radio station say that he thought Men Who Stare at Goats was 95% hokum.
Well, it probably is, but that 5% is the bit that you've got to
It's
look
the
at.
5%, which is there's truth in that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about John B. Alexander is that it shows that these aren't just scientific experimentations. They have got military applications. The military are very, very interested in these things. If you want to use military equipment, if you want to use an American aircraft carrier, tank, whatever, the people who provide that, the American military, they will get a final rewrite of the script. So they're basically not going to allow you to do anything that that portrays them in a negative light. And this is all documented in a book called Operation Hollywood. Right. You know, many films have basically had the scripts, characters, plots completely rewritten to sort of, you know, formulate to the military propaganda.
He's come up with this phantom crime, and this has caused you to be locked up in a mental institution for 9.5 years.
Yeah. It's very important that you now make available this information that gave you justification to implicate and incriminate me in an alleged serious crime. And I'm sure you would agree, Detective Inspector, that as in any court matter relating to a serious criminal allegation, the police and the prosecution are duty bound to substantiate and corroborate such criminal allegations.
Yeah.
It is very likely, Mr. Rogers, this case will hopefully in some time in the near future go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And just to recap, you were never arrested and you've
No.
never been charged, you've never had any judicial process or anything like that. Now, let's just, you said that when you were being followed, that you felt that it came to opaque the activity of them on your back on the 30th of August, you said.
Yeah.
And this crime is alleged to have taken place on the 1st of September, this phantom crime.
Sure.
Now, something quite significant happened on the 31st of August.
Yeah.
Which was?
Princess Diana mysteriously died.
Right. And a lot of people think she was murdered.
Oh, yeah.
Probably by MI5 or MI6.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Right. And so you strongly believe that you were being set up as some supposed IRA terrorist so that the security services could say, no, we weren't in France, we were in Glasgow chasing these IRA guys, and we've even got one of them in a mental institution to prove it.
Yeah.
But a device using a similar principle to Trombley's, over unity allegedly called an N machine.
The N machine.
Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who we know as the Apollo 11 astronaut, not Apollo 11, Apollo 14, tries to buy his device.
Correct, or it makes him an offer, De Palma refuses, and then Edgar Mitchell says to De Palma, according to De Palma, if you're going to go around doing this sort of thing in California, you're going to get your head blown off, which of course De Palma said was a threat. And De Palma further, you know, and this is another topic I wanted to comment on, says that, you know, Mitchell then was at that time involved with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and that is still going, IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, and Mitchell talks about that, and there's various other people involved with that. I know that Uri Geller has been involved with...
Mitchell's very much into healing using electromagnetic fields and telepathy or consciousness, this kind of thing. Psychic phenomena.
And that falls under the remit of this IONS research that he claims to be, you know, kind of involved with helping to get credibility for. And De Palma says that that's basically a CIA front, that those sorts of organisations like IONS are a CIA front to keep an eye on what people are doing, you know, who are coming up with these free energy devices, what sort of things they've developed, how they're planning to develop them. And that's what De Palma says in this clip. De Palma himself, he ended up dead in 1997.
The sort of British arm of mind control would be the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is Ostensibly, it's a charity organisation funded by Rockefeller, among other people, that deals with crowd control, applying psychological techniques to society, and you know, how to deal with mass brainwashing, essentially. That started in 1921, and in 1932, the directorship was taken over by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who was a German psychiatrist, and later he was taken over to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA.
Right.
A lot of the techniques were using sort of Operation Paperclip Nazi officers that were brought over to America.
This was after the war.
This was after the war, but obviously this was
Yep.
before 1953. So you could assume that basically the official start date of 1953 was probably not. It was probably going on a lot of time before that.
A chap named Al Fassbender, who was a captain in Vietnam, and he tells the story of the last days of the war when a general came in and he said, right, we've got to go behind the lines to pick 5 soldiers up. And he had 2 heavily armed guards with him. And he thought, this is a bit queer, a general going behind the lines just to pick 5 soldiers up. Anyway, he didn't argue with them, and they went behind the lines. They landed at this place about 200 yards from the actual jungle itself, and they seen these soldiers. They were in disguise sort of thing, they're all black, and he called them over, you know, and they came walking towards him, and they got within about 10 yards, and he said to these 2 guards, fire, and they shot them dead. He said, I went berserk, why did you shoot these soldiers dead? He said, there's a reason. So he said to the guards, turn them on the back and wash the faces. So he turned them on the back and they washed the faces, and he called them over. He said, look, they were clones. He said they had 20 clones in Vietnam in the last few weeks of the war, and they went in groups of 5, and the first 15 had been killed within a few days, and these 5 were the only survivors. And he said they couldn't take them back because they have the implants in the head, and all as they taught is to kill. They killed men, women and children, animals. That's all they did. So they actually killed them there and buried them.
One of the notable hypnotists was George Esterbrookes. Now, he was basically concerned with hypno-programming during World War II. And one of the things that he said was that basically he can hypnotise any person to do anything without their knowledge or consent. He can hypnotise people to commit treason against their country, completely breaking their moral code, and, you know, without their knowledge. And this was later sort of confirmed by another psychiatrist, J.G. Watkins, who actually did experiments with soldiers. What he would do was he would hypno-program a suggestion into their head, and they would attack superior officers. And a similar thing happened with Mark Chapman, basically. Mark Chapman stood, after shooting Lennon, stood there reading The Catcher in the Rye, which a lot of people have suggested is his trigger. This is the thing that triggers his alternate killer personality.
Because that's the key thing in hypnosis, isn't it, in control, is a word which will trigger that person into...
Interestingly, Mark Chapman was reading A Catcher in the Rye. John Hinckley, after he tried to assassinate President Reagan, stood there reading A Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
John Hinckley, his family was intimately connected with the Bush family. Neil Bush was having dinner with John Hinckley's father at the very same time that John Hinckley was trying to kill his boss, the president.
Right.